The night lay heavy over the lonely prairie, a cold silence stretching for miles, broken only by the whisper of wind through tall grass and the distant cry of a coyote hunting in the dark. At the edge of the small settlement, far from the lamplight, of cabins and the chatter of taverns, there stood an old twisted tree, gnarled and black against the pale light of the half-moon. Beneath its branches, tied so cruelly that the ropes cut into her skin, hung a young woman who had once been part of the town, who had once laughed and spoken with the same people who now had cast her aside. Her arms were pulled back behind the trunk, wrists bound tight, her head drooping forward as strands of hair clung to her tear-streaked face. But it wasn't only the ropes that marked her. Across her bare back, carved with deliberate, merciless strokes of a knife, were the letters that spelled her doom raw. Bleeding words meant to brand her for life. Comanche Lover. Each letter burned like fire, the pain so deep she felt it in her very bones, but worse than the agony was the shame. They had not just tried to punish her body, they had tried to erase her soul, to strip her of honor, dignity, and name. She could still hear the voices from earlier in the night, the angry shouts, the accusing fingers, the neighbors she had known since childhood yelling that she was a traitor, that she deserved worse than death. No one listened when she tried to explain. No one cared when she begged for mercy, for she had done nothing more than bring water to a wounded Comanche boy left dying on the outskirts. To her, it had been a simple act of humanity, a refusal to let a young man die of thirst in the dirt. But to them, it was proof enough. To help the enemy was to join the enemy, and so they turned on her like a pack of wolves themselves. Some had held her down, others spit curses, and when the knife carved into her back, there were even cheers. That sound haunted her more than the pain, the cheers of people she had once trusted, who had once borrowed sugar from her family, who had once smiled at her in church. Now their faces were twisted with hate, and when it was done, when the last letter was carved, they dragged her to this tree, tied her up as though she were nothing but an example, and left her under the cold moon to bleed, to suffer, maybe to die. Their horses' hooves thundered away, leaving only silence behind, and in that silence she realized how truly abandoned she was. The night deepened, the wind colder, biting through the torn remains of her dress, and every breath made the wounds in her back throb with fire. Her hands were numb, her legs weak, and she could feel her strength slipping with every passing moment. She tilted her head back, staring up at the black branches above, and whispered prayers into the emptiness. Not for rescue. She no longer believed anyone would come, but for death, quick and merciful, before the wolves came, because she knew they would. Even now she could hear them, distant at first, faint howls carried on the wind, but each hour closer, each cry louder. They could smell blood, they could sense weakness, and the smell of her wounds would be a beacon in the dark. Her heart pounded. In her chest, fear mixing with despair, but she could not even run, could not even lift her arms to defend herself. She was nothing more than bait tied to a tree, waiting for the wilderness to finish what the townsfolk had started. Her tears froze on her cheeks in the night air, her lips trembling as she remembered her family. Her father, who had turned his back on her when the accusations began, his voice booming that no daughter of his would bring shame to his name. Her mother, torn, weeping silently, yet not strong enough to defend her. Her friends, the ones who once swore they would stand by her, lowering their eyes, pretending not to hear her pleas. Every face she loved had abandoned her, every tie she once trusted had been severed in a single night. And so she hung there, half dead, half alive, the hours stretching like an eternity, her body weakening, her spirit crumbling, until the sound of footsteps stirred the silence. At first she thought she imagined it, her mind conjuring hope where there was none. But then the sound grew clearer, a faint crunch of boots on dry grass, soft but steady, unlike the heavy gallop of horses or the mocking laughter of her tormentors. Her heart seized. Was it the townsfolk returning to finish her? Was it outlaws? Who would bring worse fates than death? Or was it the wolves themselves closer than she realized? She strained her eyes into the darkness, her breath shallow, and then she saw it. A shadow slipping free from the tree line, tall, lean, moving with a silence that made the hair on her neck rise. The figure paused at the edge of moonlight, watching her. For a terrible moment she wanted to scream, to call out, but shame and fear silenced her tongue. What words could she speak branded as she was, marked as traitor, as outcast? But the figure did not laugh, did not jeer, did not move toward her with malice. He simply stood, as though weighing something deep within himself. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. The moonlight caught his face, a hard, weathered face, scarred by wind and time, his eyes dark and unreadable. He looked like a man pulled from the wilderness itself, a shadow of the frontier, and in truth that was what he was, a scout, a wanderer, a man who trusted no one, not even himself. She did not know him, but in his presence she felt something strange, an absence of judgment, an absence of the cruel glee that had filled the eyes of her people. He said nothing at first, and in that silence her fear mixed with fragile hope. When he finally moved, it was not to harm her, but to help. His hand slipped to the knife at his belt, and for one wild heartbeat she thought he meant to finish her suffering. But instead, the blade flashed against the ropes, slicing them strand by strand until her arms fell free. She would have collapsed to the ground if not for his steady grip catching her. Weak, half-conscious, she slumped against him, her body trembling from pain and exhaustion. Her mind swam, darkness closing in, but through the fog she heard his voice for the first time. Low, steady, carrying a weight of experience she could not yet understand, he whispered, "You're not dying here." And then the shadows of night swallowed her, leaving only the knowledge that she had been saved. By a stranger, a silent scout who had appeared from the darkness when all hope was gone. The wind rolled cold across the open prairie, carrying with it the smell of smoke from distant fires and the silence of a land too wide for comfort. To most men, this silence was terrifying. But to him, the scout, it was home. He moved like a shadow across the tall grass, each step measured, each sound avoided, his presence blending into the wilderness. The settlers whispered about him when they thought he wasn't listening. Some called him a drifter, others a ghost. To the military, he was a useful tool, a man who could track enemies where no soldier dared to go. To the townsfolk, he was nothing, more than a dangerous loner who appeared only when blood was near. No one really knew his name, though some claimed he had once fought beside the Rangers, others swore he had lived with the Comanche themselves. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. He had no ties, no family, no place to call home. He belonged only to the wilderness, and the wilderness had claimed him long ago. That night, as the moon painted the prairie silver, he had been following a trail. Hoof prints pressed into the dirt, wagon wheels cutting deep, the scattered signs of men moving with cruel purpose. His instincts told him the trail led to nothing good. Too many boot marks, too much haste. He crouched low, fingers brushing the soil, eyes sharp even in the dim light. There had been shouting here not long ago, the marks of struggle in the dirt. Drops of blood half dried. The scout's jaw tightened. He had seen this pattern before. Frontier justice. Or worse, the kind of mob that didn't wait for law, the kind that carved its verdict in flesh. He followed the signs further until the trail ended at the tree. That's when he saw her. At first he thought she was already gone, a lifeless figure tied cruelly to bark. But as he drew closer, he heard it. The faint rasp of breath, shallow, broken, but alive. He saw the wounds carved into her back, the words bleeding and raw. Comanche Lover. His lips pressed into a thin line. He had seen men branded like cattle, but never a woman, never with such hate. For a moment, something dark stirred inside him. Anger, old memories, the weight of things he did not speak of. He looked at her face, pale in the moonlight, eyes glazed with pain, yet still holding a spark of fear, of shame. She didn't cry out when she saw him. She didn't beg. She only stared, as if waiting to see whether he would finish what the others had begun. But he did not speak. He never wasted words when silence would do. Instead, he pulled his knife and cut her down. Her body crumpled, weak as water, and he caught her before she struck the ground. For a man who lived alone, who trusted no one, the weight of another. Human being in his arms felt foreign, yet he did not hesitate. He knew the wolves were close. He could smell them, hear their distant howls carried on the wind. If he left her here, she would not last an hour. He carried her through the grass, moving swiftly but silent, his eyes scanning the horizon. Each shadow was a threat, each sound a warning. When he reached the shelter of a small ravine, hidden from the open plain, he set her down gently and began to work. He tore strips of cloth from his own shirt, binding her wounds as best he could, his hands steady though his heart beat hard in his chest. She moaned softly, pain lacing her breath, but she did not resist. He lit no fire. Fire would draw eyes, and he had too many enemies to risk it. Instead, he gave her water, let her drink slowly, then sat with his back to the wall of stone, rifle across his knees, eyes never resting. Through the long hours of the night, he listened to the wind, to the wolves, to the distant crack of wood from a fire miles away, and he thought about the woman he had saved. Why had he done it? He told himself it was instinct, the same instinct that made him put down a wounded horse rather than let it suffer. But deep down, he knew it was more. He had seen injustice too many times, seen men take out their fear and hatred on the innocent, and each time it left a scar on him as deep as the ones he carried on his own flesh. Perhaps this was his chance to silence the ghosts that followed him. When dawn came, the prairie turned gold, and the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them until memory crashed back. She winced, gasping, her hands reaching for her back. You should have left me," she whispered, voice hoarse from thirst and pain. He only shook his head, expression unreadable. "You're not dead," he said simply. Those were the first real words he gave her. She stared at him, searching his face for judgment, for mockery, but found none. Only a cold resolve, a silence that somehow felt safer than all the noise of the town that had condemned her. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had helped, but the words stuck in her throat, and he would not have answered anyway. The scout was not a man of explanations. He was a man of action, of shadows, of survival. Yet as the hours stretched, she realized something strange. Though he spoke little, though his eyes were always scanning the horizon, he had not abandoned her. He stayed. He hunted small game and brought her food. He found herbs to ease her pain. He never touched her more than necessary, never asked her to speak of what had happened. In his silence, she felt a kind of protection she had never known, not even among those who once called themselves her family. Still, the brand on her back was more than wounds. It was a curse. She knew the people of the town would never take her back, would never forgive what they believed she had done. She was marked forever. And somewhere, deep inside, she feared the scout would come to see her the same way, that one day he would turn, look at her wounds, and decide she was not worth saving. But for now, in the shadow of the ravine, with wolves still howling in the distance, she let herself believe in the strange safety of his silence. And the scout? He sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes hard as stone, and wondered if he had just bound his fate to hers. The night in the wilderness was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant cry of coyotes and the whisper of wind weaving through the trees. She lay on a rough bed of furs in the small hidden cabin, her back still burning from the carved letters that had marked her flesh like a cruel brand of shame. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw again the mocking faces of the townsfolk, the way they had tied her to that tree, the jeers of Comanche Lover, echoing in her ears as though the words themselves were meant to bury her deeper than any grave. The scout who had saved her moved quietly through the cabin, a silent man who spoke little but whose presence was steady, like the earth itself. She did not yet know his name, but she knew the lines of his face were drawn by years of hardship, and the cold fire in his eyes belonged to a man who had seen too much to ever fully return to the world of ordinary people. He cared for her wounds with steady hands, not asking questions, not demanding explanations, but she could feel his thoughts turning, measuring, considering the risks he had taken by cutting her down. And she knew the truth. Her enemies in town would not rest. They wanted her gone, not simply shamed, but silenced forever. She whispered her fears to him late in the night, her voice cracking as she confessed that she had not betrayed anyone, that she had not been what they claimed. The brand on her back was not about love for an enemy. It was punishment for knowledge. She had seen something men of power in the town could not allow to be spoken aloud. Her trembling hands clutched the rough blanket as she admitted she had witnessed a killing, the kind of killing no one was supposed to see. The scout's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if some part of him already expected her words. He had always known cruelty could wear a clean face in the daylight, hidden beneath the smiles of merchants and sheriffs. He listened without interrupting, his silence giving her the strength to continue. She told him of a night when a deal was made in secret, when two riders had brought a chained Comanche boy into town under cover of darkness, when the sheriff and two wealthy ranchers had taken him behind the old livery and beaten him until his body no longer moved. She had not meant to witness it, had only been walking home after helping a widow with her firewood, but she had seen too much. When she had screamed, when she had begged them to stop, they had turned on her with cold eyes, and she had known she was next. They did not kill her outright. That would have raised too many questions. But branding her, tying her to that tree, painting her as a traitor, that was enough to destroy her voice. She was supposed to vanish quietly, her shame, silencing her more than any grave could. As her story unfolded, the scout's jaw tightened. He knew the truth of towns like these, places where justice bent to the weight of gold and rifles. He had left such places long ago, choosing the silence of the wild over the noise of lies. But now the wilderness itself had dragged him back into their mess. He rose without a word and stepped outside into the dark, his sharp eyes sweeping the tree line. He knew they would come. Men like that did not leave loose ends, and she was the most dangerous loose end of all. At dawn, he found signs, tracks. In the mud not far from the cabin, too many to be hunters or wanderers, riders. A group had already been searching, maybe closer than either of them wanted to admit. When he returned, she was awake, fear already clouding her face as if she sensed the danger pressing in. He told her little, only that they would have to move, that the cabin was no longer safe. She nodded, though the effort of rising nearly made her collapse. He steadied her with a strong arm, his silence once again saying more than words could. Together, they left the cabin, vanishing deeper into the wilderness. Every step was a gamble. The scout led her through deer paths and hidden ravines, his knowledge of the land their only shield. Behind them, the hunters drew closer. He could feel it in the sudden quiet of the birds, in the faint smell of smoke on the wind. The woman clung to the thought that this silent man might truly be her only chance, that his presence between her and the riders was the thin line between life and death. But doubt gnawed at her. Why would he risk so much for her, a stranger, branded as a traitor? She did not know that in his silence was not indifference, but recognition. Her pain was not hers alone. He too had once been cast aside, branded in his own way, not with a knife, but with whispers that drove him from his people. In her, he saw a reflection of his own exile. The night fell again, and with it came the sound of hooves far in the distance. The hunt was no longer secret. The riders were closing in. The scout knew they would not rest until she was either dead or dragged back to town to face something worse. And so he made a decision he had avoided for years. He would not run from this fight. If they wanted her silenced, they would have to go through him, and the wilderness itself would be his weapon. The woman, clutching her torn shawl around her shoulders, watched him vanish into the trees, moving like a shadow among shadows, and for the first time since her ordeal began, a spark of hope flickered in her chest. She was not alone anymore, and though her enemies hunted with fire and steel, the silent scout carried something far more dangerous: patience, skill, and a quiet fury that would not allow her to fall. The forest lay heavy with shadows, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for blood to be spilled. She sat by the fire, the orange glow flickering against her pale face. The carved brand on her back burning like it had been etched only hours ago. Her savior, the silent scout, had vanished into the night, his figure swallowed whole by the darkness, leaving her alone with nothing but the howl of wolves far away and the gnawing fear that he would never return. Yet deep inside, a strange trust had taken root. For the first time since her torment began, she believed someone might actually stand for her, but she also knew the truth. If he failed, the riders would find her, and this time, there would be no cutting free. The scout moved like a wraith through the trees. Every step was careful, his moccasins leaving no sound on the forest floor. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, caught the glow of torches weaving through the valley below. They were closer now. 6 riders, armed and hungry for blood, their voices carrying on the cold air as they cursed her name, calling her traitor, witch, and worse. He crouched low behind a fallen log, listening. These were not men seeking justice. They were men hiding a crime, desperate to bury the one witness who could expose them. Their laughter was cruel, their confidence loud. They did not yet know. A hunter stalked them from the shadows, a man who had killed silently before and would do so again if pushed. Hours stretched into an eternity. The woman by the fire tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled at her, her body too broken to fight against it. Every sound made her flinch, branches snapping, wind rustling, an owl's cry, and every time she feared it was them. Yet when sleep finally took her, it was restless, filled with visions of the tree where they had tied her, of knives carving flesh, of voices chanting Comanche Lover, until it became a curse louder than thunder. She woke with a gasp, sweat on her brow, only to find the scout standing silently at the edge of the firelight, his knife dark with something she could not name. His eyes told her enough. Blood had already been spilled, but the hunt was not over. He told her little, only that they had to move again before dawn, that more riders would come. His words were few, his voice low and grave, but she understood the weight behind them. They began their trek deeper into the wilderness, her steps faltering, his hand steadying her when she stumbled. He was no longer simply protecting her. He was leading her into something larger, toward a reckoning that neither of them could escape. By midday, the sun broke through the trees, painting the forest floor in shards of light. For a moment, it almost felt safe. But then came the crack of a rifle, sharp and merciless, shattering the calm. Bark exploded near her head, and she dropped to the ground with a cry. The scout pulled her into the cover of rocks, his body shielding hers as bullets tore through the undergrowth. Voices rang out, angry, determined. They had found them. The scout's jaw tightened as he counted the shots, noted the angles, measured. The skill of his enemies. These were no drunken ranch hands now. These were killers sent to finish what the others had failed. The fight that followed was brutal and silent in its efficiency. The scout moved like a phantom, slipping through trees, striking from shadows, his bow and knife flashing with deadly purpose. One by one, the riders fell, their arrogance meeting the cold hand of a man who had lived too long in darkness to fear blood. Yet it was not easy. A bullet grazed his side, crimson soaking his shirt, but still he pressed on. The woman watched, in horror and awe, as he fought not like a hero from tales, but like something far more primal, an animal protecting its wounded. When the last gun fell silent, the forest seemed to sigh in relief. Smoke curled from the ground, where torches had dropped, the bodies of the riders scattered like broken puppets. The woman crawled to him, her trembling hands pressing against his wound, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the truth. Pain, loneliness, and a silent understanding that her suffering was his own. "Because," he finally murmured, his voice rough with years of silence, "no one saved me." The words broke something inside her. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, not in fear, not in shame, but in release. They were both exiles, both branded in different ways by a world that thrived on cruelty. And in that shared brokenness, they found strength. But the story was not yet over. The sheriff himself would not let this go. Back in town, he had gathered more men, armed them with promises of gold and land. The hunt was no longer about one woman. It was about power, about silencing anyone who might challenge it. The scout knew this. He knew they could run for days, for weeks, and still be hunted. There was only one way to end it. Take the fight back to where it began. And so, bloodied but unbroken, they made their way toward the town. Each step was heavier than the last, but her fear was no longer the same. She was not walking toward death. She was walking toward truth. The scout walked beside her, silent as ever, but she felt his presence like a shield around her. Together, they were no longer prey. They were something far more dangerous, survivors with nothing left to lose. When they finally stepped out of the trees and saw the town on the horizon, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The showdown was coming. Blood would be spilled. And in that blood, perhaps, redemption could finally be found.